know into this new market. Now, we didn't know what was going to happen in 2008 because we didn't know that back then that the market, seller's market, was going to be extended artificially by subprime mortgages, and that people were going to get these negative AM loans, and everything was going to come crashing down in 2008, 2009, along with the world economy. But we knew it was going to be there was going to be a correction. Now then, in like 2013, 2014, we did part two. Market is changing. Are you changing with it? Which was a little bit of a happier presentation because people had gone through the financial crisis. If you were an agent back in 2009, if you were a homeowner back in 2009, you know what it was like in that period, about how difficult it was, the market. And so when we got to like 2013, and we saw that the market was starting to incline, we went and sat down again with our agents, and we did something for the consumers to say, all right, so now what it's been a long time since we had a seller's market. What does a seller's market look like? What do people need to be prepared for? And so we talked about the fact that prices are going to start going up, and how days on market would go down, and people would have to, the prices of homes sold would get closer to the asking price and things like that. And we were a little ahead. The market took a little longer to really develop and ripen into a full-scale seller's market, which really didn't happen like 2017, 18. But we did have, from 2012 on, every year we had more sales than the previous year. It just took a while for the appreciation to catch up. And then when appreciation was ready to catch up, 2017, 2018, we got hit with the SALT cap, which I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the idea that it capped property taxes and state income taxes at $10,000 for a taxpayer who's itemizing meant that properties in our marketplace, where we do have high property taxes, that they were getting more expensive. So that stole a little bit of the appreciation momentum that we had. And then of course, COVID happened. And then once the COVID restrictions ended, the market just took off, and prices are now up 35, 40, 45% in some markets from where they were back in 2019 pre-COVID. So the market's been going nuts for the last 2 years. And now for the last few months, partly because of interest rates going up as they went up starting in January, and partly as a result of like the market couldn't stay that hot forever. There was always going to be a slowdown. The market has started to cool a little bit. Now, here's the thing. I think that a lot of the media coverage of this has been overblown. And I think a lot of the panic that some people are feeling, like, oh my God, the market, the seller's market's over. We're going to start seeing prices go down. We're going to start seeing. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's not as bad as that. It's not 2009. We'll talk about why it's not 2009 or 2008 again. We'll talk about some of the reasons why I think the market is going to settle into a balanced, normal market, not a crazy market. And the basic idea is this. Yes, the market is cooling, but think of like a pie when you take it out of the oven. It's not as hot as it was when it was in the oven. It's cooling, but it doesn't mean it's cold. Doesn't mean you can take your face and just dip it into the pie and start eating the pie, because the pie's still hot. It's cooler than it was when it was in the oven. Think of the last 2 years of the housing market as being in the oven, and think of it right now, it's on the windowsill cooling. So it's cooler than last year. We were never going to sustain the price appreciation and sales figures that we had last year. But in most of our markets, the sales numbers are roughly equivalent to 2018 to 2019, which was a pretty strong seller's market. This will be 2021, 22 will be the third most sales in the history of our region. Third most outside of New York City, but the suburban region, third biggest sales year ever. The only reason that people are a little bit worried is that the best two sales years were 20 and 21. So it's worse than the last 2 years, but it's better than all the years that came before that. So let's go. Let's look at some stuff. And from here on in, we have lots of graphs and stuff. So you don't have to look at me anymore, which I know most of you will be very pleased about. Let me make sure this little clicker works. Fantastic. All right. So first of all, let's talk about why this isn't 2008. Anybody that makes a comparison to 2008 is just trying to get clicks or trying to get attention or is trying to scare people or whatever. It is absolutely not 2008. And here's why. Three reasons. Number one, what we had for the last couple of years was organic price appreciation, by which I mean it wasn't really artificially generated. It was generated by the fundamentals of economics, supply and demand. We had low inventory, and we had, once the pandemic restrictions lifted in June 2020, we had just roaring demand. Demand was strong in 18, it was strong in 19, it was strong the first 2 months of 20, then COVID. And then in June, when the COVID restrictions lifted, not even the pandemic ended. Well, now we're not in a pandemic anymore. We're the endemic or whatever they're calling it. But the pandemic didn't end in June 2020, but the restrictions did. People could at least go see houses again. And the market took off like I've never seen it in June, July, all the way through the end of the year. In fact, even though we had 3 dead months in the spring of 2020, 2020 was still like the best year in history to that point, beat only then by 2021, which was even better. But it was all based, I won't say all, it was 85 to 90% based on organic growth. It was basic demand. There was low supply. So for example, look at this. This is what inventory looked like as we got, this is just Westchester and the Hudson Valley, just as an example. And we have this, you saw the same numbers in New Jersey, you see the same numbers in Connecticut. All right. But and probably saw the same numbers throughout the entire country for that matter. But look at this. 6 months is a balanced market. 6 months is right around here. Okay. So once we got to 17 and 18, we started to have a balanced market, and then it started to go down. And then in 2021, by the end of 21, it was at 2 months, 3 months for single family homes, which is a very tight housing market, very few homes for sale, lots of people trying to buy them. And everyone says, well, what happened when rates went up in January? Well, that absolutely chilled it. That's what has slowed the market down. I think it was going to slow down anyway, but that's what's, I think, slowed it down a little bit more since the rates went up. But like I've said to people, back last year, we had 5 buyers for every seller. Now we've got like 2 or 3 buyers for every seller, but we still have too many buyers for every listing that we have. There still is not enough inventory. That will change. Inventory will come up, I expect, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why, but we're still in a place where this is relatively organic appreciation. So this is the inflation adjusted average sales price in Westchester, which I use as a barometer, not because I love Westchester and I just want to love Westchester so much. I love Westchester's great, but I also love Bergen County. I also love all the markets we service. But Westchester has it's unusual in that we've got average sales price going back to 1981. So I can see the long-term trends with Westchester. And really, to be honest, all the counties kind of move the same direction. There'll be subtle differences, the same way that there's micro differences that one village might do better than the village across the county or whatever. But generally speaking, when the market is good, everybody's prices go up. When the market's not so good, everybody's prices go down kind of at the same rate. So look at Westchester, just as an example. The average sales price in Westchester, adjusted for inflation, okay, which obviously didn't make it very big, it's adjusted for inflation as of this year, as of the inflation we've had for the first 6 months of 22, okay? And you can see, as you look at this market, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here's what a seller's market looks like. You kind of get a big surge, a big bulge, it kind of comes back. Big bulge in the mid 2000s, then it kind of comes back. And then it kind of bounced around a bit, and we started to see the beginning of the bulge, and then inflation has kind of taken some of that away. But here's the thing, like the inflation adjusted average sales price is still below where it was in the last seller's market. It's not like prices have gone out of control. In nominal terms, they may be higher than they've ever been, but in real terms, they're not. I mean, they're lower than they were back in the 2000s, in the last seller's market. And if you kind of look at the sweep of the curve, it's generally upward. Yeah, I mean, homes do appreciate over time at a reasonable rate of appreciation. And unfortunately, what kind of happens is we get bounce, 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 leap, fall, bounce, 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 bounce. So it's not uniform 2 to 3% every year. It's 1, 1, 1, 14, 18, 1, something like that. So that's why you hold real estate for the long term, so you can take advantage of those jumps when they happen. But my point is that this was organic growth. This was not created by artificiality, except for just one little bit of artificiality in the market. And the artificiality came from a change in the mix of buyers, of the type of demand that we had in 2020 and 2021, which is to say, we got an influx of buyers from New York City, a lot from Manhattan, a lot from Brooklyn, who are higher income buyers coming to the Hudson Valley, coming to Northern New Jersey, probably going out to Long Island as well, although we don't cover that, but to the markets that they surged into the market. Okay. It was a significant influx of buyers who were generally in the high end, which changed the mix of buyers and tended to strengthen up the high end in a way that it wasn't strengthening the low end, which will tend to drive average prices a little bit artificially up. But it wasn't as if those buyers, it wasn't like 2008 when those buyers had no business buying a home. It's not like it was those buyers were in, got loans they shouldn't have gotten. And those buyers would not have bought without the loans. These were buyers that were probably going to buy a home in the suburbs in 2022, 23, 24. It's just that because the pandemic in 2020, they accelerated their purchase. They moved their purchase up. They said, why are we living in the city? We're going to leave next year anyway. Let's get out. All the restaurants are closed. All the museums are closed. Why are we living? And we're living in 800 square feet. Let's go buy a house in Columbia County or Westchester County or Bergen County or Passaic or wherever else. So we had a little bit of artificiality there, but not like it was in 2008. Most of the growth that we had was organic, all right? And it was organic, driven by low inventory, and it was driven by cheap money. I mean, look at the interest rates that we had since 2000, how they kept going down. We kept talking about historical low interest rates, until they popped. Really just this year, they popped up, and they're up, 5 to 6% now. But just to put it in context, the rates are still lower than they were during the last seller's market. So the people that get wound up about, the rates are going to kill the market. Well, these are lower rates than we had in 2005. And 2005 was a barn burner of a year. Rates aren't keeping people from buying the home. And as I said a minute ago, the inflation adjusted average sales price is still below where it was in 2005. So is there still meat on the bone? Yeah, there's still some meat on the bone. We're not going to see the market just collapse right now. I mean, you never know. There might be an economic crisis or something, but the market itself, I think, is very healthy. We still have very little inventory. And even with rates going up, all that happens when rates go up is that people stop doing 30-year fixed and they do 7-year adjustables. If they want to buy the home, they're going to buy the home. And they're still fighting too many buyers over too many homes. So that's number one. We had organic price appreciation. Number two, this time compared to 2008, there is no underlying foreclosure time bomb that is waiting for us at the end of the rainbow, okay? And the reason for that is 2005 to 2008, we averaged about 30% of loans were adjustable rate mortgages, which is the highest it's ever been. I think I have a graph right here. Look at this graph. Look at this is from, and I want to credit them, John Burns and financialsamurai.com, who put this together. It's a great graph because what it shows is that in the mid 2000s, adjustable rate mortgages made up 30 to 35% of the mortgages from 2005 to 2008 or 2007 or so. And then everything started to fall. Okay. Comparatively, in the market that we've had for the last 10 years, less than 10% of mortgages have been adjustable. And since 2020, less than 5% of mortgages have been adjustable. Why? Because fixed rate mortgages are below 3%. Why would you get an adjustable at 2.25% when you can lock in at 3% a 30-year fixed rate mortgage? So everybody got 30-year fixed rate mortgages over the last few years, which is going to be a problem going ahead. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the basic idea is that it's different from 2008 because in 2008, we had all these people who had adjustable rate mortgages, and they weren't just adjustable rate mortgages. Like the mortgages that people are getting today, the adjustable rate mortgages are fine. They're fixed for 7 years. Then after that, they can adjust by a certain percentage, and they're going to adjust, they might adjust a couple of points or something like that. But what they had in 2005, we started to see not just adjustable rate mortgages. We had, they would adjust after 1 year. They would negative AM, which meant that interest was being piled and your down payment was being piled on top of the loan. It was a mess. And people were just getting qualified for these loans that had no business getting qualified, and they were victimized by the mortgage industry, giving them loans that they did not qualify for. And really the true victim were all the people on Wall Street that just incentivized people to give out these terrible loans because they were buying them up like crazy, and then they almost blew up the world. So that's what caused 2008 and 2009. It was all the loans that were unsustainable, which then led, once prices went down, all these people were sitting on homes that were worth less than they owed, and the payments weren't up by 25, 30%. They're like, forget it, we're walking away. And yet the foreclosure rates just spike. Comparatively to the foreclosure rate went as high as 2% of mortgages, 2%. Right now, it's 1/20th of that. It's 0.1%. Now, there has been a little bit of a bump in foreclosures this year, and that freaked people out. But that's only because there was a moratorium on foreclosures for like 2 years. So we had a backlog. Nobody's getting foreclosed on who bought a home in the last 5 years, unless something catastrophic has happened to them. And there's going to be some sad percentage, tragically, of some people who will lose their homes in any kind of market. But the fact is, everybody who bought in the last 5 years is a 30-year fixed rate mortgage at 3%. Inflation's at 7 or 8%. How could they default on their mortgage? The mortgage gets cheaper every year. It's the mortgage I got last year is 8% cheaper today than it was last year. So that fixed rate mortgage is going to lock everybody, and no one's going to get foreclosed on. We're not going to see it. Here's the foreclosure rates. Look at these foreclosure rates back in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. They spiked up. They're well above the levels from in the middle of the seller's market. And where we are right now is well below the levels. Just look at 2019, 2007, 2018. That's probably a better measure. Right now, it's a little bit artificially depressed because the moratorium stilled everything and whatnot. But, but the bottom line is we're not seeing a foreclosure time bomb explode on the market, which is what killed the market. And then number three, this is going to take some explaining. Homes are still, because we said that the average price, if you adjust for inflation, is still below where it was in the mid 2000s. Well, I will tell you that the payment that you have to make, the monthly payment, which is a function not just of the average price, but of the average interest rate for that year, the monthly payment to buy an average priced home in our markets is much lower now than it was in the last two sellers markets. It's lower now than the 2005, say 2006 peak seller market, because the inflation adjusted price back in the mid 2000s was higher than it is now, and rates were higher than they are right now. So obviously the payment would be higher than it is right now. And the average monthly payment controlled for inflation is lower now than it was in the seller's market in the mid 80s. It's much higher in nominal price, but not inflation adjusted price. The reason it's lower than it was in the mid 80s is because although the inflation adjusted price is higher now than it was then, because there has been, even with inflation, there's been inflation adjusted price appreciation for the last 40 years, but rates are so dramatically lower than they were back in the 80s. Rates were like 10, 12% back in the mid 80s. They're at 5% now. So that payment's a lot lower. So when I say affordability, what I mean is the monthly payment you have to make to buy a home in our market is higher than it's been for the last 10 years because rates are higher than they've been for the last 2 years, and because of inflation, and because of prices going up. But from a historical perspective, it's lower than the last two sellers markets. And just here's what I mean. This is the graph of the monthly payment. The orange is the monthly payment adjusted for inflation, which is what you should look at, because it's not fair to compare monthly payments not adjusted for inflation going back 40 years. But you can see with that purple line that I drew, how much lower today's monthly payment is than the monthly payment during the last two sellers markets, and certainly a lot lower than it was during the peak of the last two sellers markets. And just to show you that, here's what the average monthly payment was to buy a home. These are all Westchester numbers, because I have those Westchester numbers going back to 81. Here's the average monthly payment required to buy a home in Westchester in 1988, 2006, and 2022. It is 29% higher in 88. It's 33% higher in 06 compared to where it was today. And the point of that is to say that, again, a little more meat on the bone. There's still some affordability here it seems crazy because prices are up so much. But remember, inflation's up a lot. Inflation's been, takes a little bit, adds a little bit every year. And rates, even though people are comparing them to the rates of last year, they're still really low from a historical perspective. They're not historical lows anymore. The historical low was 3%, 2.5%, whatever we had back in 2021. But they're still really low. And so because of that, the average monthly payment that you have to make to buy a home in Westchester or Bergen or Rockland or Passaic or Fairfield is lower now than it's been during the last two sellers markets. Now, 2 years ago, when rates were where they were and prices hadn't yet taken a jump, I used to tell people the monthly payments required to buy a home is lower than it's been in 40 years, because it was. 2 years ago, the monthly payment was lower than at any time in any kind of market for the last 40 years. But obviously, with prices going up and rates going up, that has caused that orange line. You see where it was 2 years ago. You can see where it is now. It's really jumped up. Now that will stabilize. It might continue to go up, but I think it's going to stabilize because I think rates will eventually settle at some level. And I think that we're going to see price appreciation, but it's not going to be as dramatic as it has been. And basically the point of this little graph here is just to say that we did a study 2 years ago in April of 2020 to look at how the housing market fares after exigent shocks, things that happen that affect the housing market. Does it snap back? And what we found was that it did snap back, that the Miami market snapped back after Andrew, the New York market snapped back after 9/11, Katrina and the financial crisis, no, but after Sandy, after Harvey, after the Camp Fires in Northern California, the market snapped back, and the market has snapped back after the pandemic. And I don't think the pandemic is going to cause any lasting damage to the housing market. If anything, it focused demand in our markets compared to other markets. All right, so that's part one. It's not 1988. It's not 1988. It's not 1988. I'm sorry, not 1988. It's not 2008. It's not 2008. It's not 2008. It's also not 1988 either, for that matter. But the one comparison point everybody has is 2008, and we're not going to have 2008. We're not going to have a foreclosure crisis. We're not going to have a 25, 30% decline in the average sales price in a year and a half like we did then. We're not going to see sales go down by 50% or anything like that. All right. Now, I just want to do a quick commercial. If you go to rand.me, NYQMR, or rand.me, NJQMR, you can see the market reports that we wrote a couple of weeks ago, which give you kind of an in-depth look at the market. And they're helpful. And I've drawn some of this data from those reports. But if you are curious to read something, those are good reports. I've been writing them for almost 20 years now. It's a good report. The Connecticut, we put that in the New York QMR for now. So NYQMR will also have Fairfield County. NJ has all the northern New Jersey counties that we cover. So let's look at 14 ways, 14, not a round number, 14 ways the market change will impact the industry. What are we going to look at? What's going to happen to the housing market over the next 3 to 5 years? All right. Number one, I think sales are going to return to 17, 18 balanced market levels. I think they have fallen from 20 and 21. I think they're going to continue to fall a little bit, but I think at some point they'll stabilize as we get more inventory, as prices settle, as people calm down. And some of the reasons why I think sales will pick up, I'll go through in a minute. But if you look, we did a comparison point here. You can see that, when we wrote the market report, this is from the market report that we just did. When we did the market report for the second quarter, we realized that comparing it to 2020 was just so misleading, because look at the numbers. The sales are way down off 2020 because 2020 was an all-time high. So we said, let's compare the sales to 2019 second quarter, which was pre-COVID and pre the kind of explosion in the market. And you can see that, sales were up in the Hudson Valley and Westchester. Westchester and the Hudson Valley, and a little bit down in Fairfield compared to 2019. And in Jersey, they were kind of mixed, but overall they were slightly down from 2019, but not terribly down from 2019. The point being that, 2018, 2019, those were really good markets that were pretty much at the time perceived to be rising sellers markets. And I think that's about where we're going to settle for the next couple of years. I don't think that we're going to go down to 2010 levels or 11 or anything like that. Second, I think prices are going to stabilize at the current levels. I don't think they're going down anytime soon. And the reason I don't think they're going down anytime soon is that we just simply don't have the inventory. When inventory is this tight, and the economy is okay. I mean, I know that there's a recession because we've had 2 quarters of negative growth. But, you know, a lot of that is there's just weird things going on with the economy right now from a supply perspective, that there just isn't enough. People stopped making things in 2020 and they have not been able to ramp up to make things again the way they were in 2019. And so as a result, there's some weird things going on in the economy. But the best barometer of where we are is just to say, you know, what's unemployment? Everybody's got a job. Unemployment's 3.6%. So everybody's got a job. And if everybody's got a job, they got a paycheck. If they got a paycheck and they have a kid, they're going to want to buy a house. That's the way it works. So I don't think prices are going down. Now you can see what the run up has been. You know, they were up in most markets between 5 and 10%. And if you look at them from 2019, you know, regionally, they're up 46% in Westchester, the Hudson Valley, and Fairfield, and they're up 33% roughly in the northern New Jersey county. So they're up sharply, and I think they're going to be up this year a little bit. But I think they'll stabilize these lows. I don't think they're going to go down not for a couple of years. They might, you know, just flatten out a little bit. That's what I would expect. But I don't think that, you know, people need to be panicked that their home prices are fading on them. And then I think here's the other thing: inventory is going to come up. It's got to come up. I mean, look where it is right now. Look how low it is, and look how interesting it is that inventory was kind of all over the place. You can see that you know the lines for each of the individual counties, and I think it's the same in northern New Jersey. See the spread? Every county had like a different level of inventory, and then like in the last couple of years, they've all gone down to like 2%. Those lines have just narrowed down, and they're all in the same place. There just is a lack of inventory. Inventory is going to come up, and it'll come up for a couple of reasons we'll talk about. Number 4, this is the easiest prediction I've ever made. The listing retention rate is going to fall down below 100%. Unbelievably, in 2020, the average home in our markets sold for more than its last asking price. And that was just unprecedented, that the average home, like not just like we had lots of bidding wars and some houses sold for over asking, but like the average home sold for over asking, which is unprecedented. You can see where the 100% line is. The only outlier in Westchester and the Hudson Valley is the Bronx, because the Bronx is an urban market, and as an urban market, it did not fare quite as well in 2021 as the more traditional suburban markets, because people were leaving the urban markets to go to the suburban markets, and there wasn't quite as much demand for those urban markets. So you see that the outlier in that of the only one not to get up above 100% was the Bronx, which is that blue line that's kind of tailing off here. And you see the same thing, I believe, in, if we can find Hudson here. Hudson was the one county in Jersey that didn't get up above 100% at some point. That's the I think it's the purple line, which is the one that kind of goes to the bottom. And the reason for that is that Hudson, like the Bronx, very urbanized, very tight living, didn't have quite the same run up that the other counties did that were more traditionally suburban. Another easy prediction: homes are going to take longer to sell, just the way it is. In a slower market, which is a cooling market, not a cold market, but a cooling market, homes are going to take a little bit longer to sell. They're not going to sell as quickly. We got it down to like the day to contract in some markets was like 45 days from listing to contract on average. The day to closing was like 4 months from the day it listed to the day it closed. And those numbers are going to go down. Those numbers are going to go down. You can see where they've been going down. Sorry, those numbers are going to go up now. They've been going down. You can see that the average was around 40 days to contract. That's the 2 lines at the bottom. We measure the days to contract in Hudson and Bergen. The other counties are days on market, which measures not just the listing date to the contract date, but the listing date to the closing date. And that, had gotten, I didn't realize it had gotten below 100 days. It was 3.5 months from listing to contract. That's also unprecedented in our market. And those numbers are going to go up. Homes are going to take a little longer to sell. Doesn't mean they're going to take 6 months to sell or 9 months to sell, but they'll probably be back up to the 4-month mark and probably the 50 to 60 day mark to get into contract. All right. So that's like the statistical things that we're going to see. And none of them were particularly surprising, although I think it's important for me to make clear that I think that sales are going to stabilize and prices are going to stabilize. So some people are afraid they're going to go way down. The other things were pretty easy. Yeah. Inventory is going to go up. Days on the market is going to go up. Retention rate is going to go down. People are going to not sell for above asking. Now let's talk about some things that I think are going to happen within the market, kind of on the ground. The first is that we're going to lose some sellers. I say that inventory is going to go up, but some inventory is going to go down. And that is the inventory that we don't really want. It's the inventory of the people that we're trying to shoot the moon because they put their home on the market for 30% above its most rational price. You know, everything was going up by 25 or 30%. So they priced it 25% above the house that sold last week down the block from them. And of course, that didn't sell. So it's empty inventory. And those people are going to pull their listings off the market. So we're going to see some of the people that weren't really serious about moving, they're going to pull their listings. But for every one of them, there's 5 of these people, owners who are now going to list because they think they're going to find something to buy. I can't tell you anecdotally how many people told me and how many agents told me that they had people that want to list their home, but they were afraid to list their home because where are they going to go? They couldn't find a house to buy. So when they're and then if you're looking for a house to buy and your home's not even on the market, the sellers don't take you as seriously as someone who's living in a hotel. All right, because they're more desperate. So those people are going to come into the market now because now they're like, okay, inventory's up. The market's a little bit more stable. It's a little bit easier. You're not going to be on bidding wars on every listing. So now it's time for me to buy and time for me to get my house on the market. So we're going to see a lot of those owners come onto the market. That's where the surge in inventory is going to come from. Number 8, this is both for the people here who are agents and people who are consumers. You're going to have a little bit longer relationship with your client, between client and agent. You know, I mean, what we had over the last 2 years was literally like, you know, a seller would meet an agent, list the home, and, you know, it would be like in contract in 2 weeks or 3 weeks and accepted offers within a week, which is really, really unusual. But what it meant was that there was just a very short period where they worked together. Now, I just want to make clear, people say, well, they didn't have to work that hard. There's a lot of work to get a home on the market. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to get the home on the market in any kind of environment, okay? And on top of that, you don't necessarily pay your agent by the hour. You pay them for the results. You pay them for the fact that a really good agent might get you a point or two more of appreciation than a mediocre agent. And that point or two is worthwhile when you're selling a $600,000 house. You know, 2 points is $12,000 more that they get you because they stage the home well and they price it correctly and they, you know, they market it well and all those kinds of things. They negotiate on your behalf and stuff like that. So I don't mean to imply like if you have a 2 week, you know, if your property's only on the market for 2 weeks, the agent didn't deserve what they got. I certainly don't want to say that. But I do think that there's a qualitative change that we're going to see in the agent-client relationships that it's different when if your home's on the market for 30, 45, 50, 60, 70 days, that you're working with that agent for a longer period of time. And my advice to agents is to be cognizant of that and pace yourself a little bit, as well as learn how to fill those gaps with communication so the seller or buyer doesn't feel that, you know, or the seller doesn't feel that you're ignoring them or that you're not paying attention or, you know, nothing's happening, whatever. And I think the other thing with buyers is that buyer relationships with agents could also be very quick because the buyer had to move quickly. But on the other hand, sometimes they were a lot long because you might work with your buyer agent for 6 months till you could actually get an offer accepted. But I just think the point is that the buyer agent relationships are going to change and people got to be prepared for that. I think also we said that sellers are going to come back on the market. We're going to see a lot of buyers come back into the market, which I think will be fine because the buyers who pulled out because they just got tired of the grind, they got tired of getting beaten out on bidding wars and things like that. So, you know, we're going to see more inventory, we're going to see more buyers. That's what's going to sustain the market and keep us at levels that are similar to what we had a couple of years ago. Number 10. The mortgage contingency is going to come back and the inspection waiver is going to go away. What we saw in the market of the last 2 years was that lots of buyers waived their mortgage contingency. And the reason they did that was that they had to compete with people who were putting 50% down or were all cash or whatever. And so if they went in and said, well, I'm going to put 25% down and I want a mortgage contingency, the seller would say, well, I'm going to take the all cash offer then because I don't want to have to worry about having to put the place back on the market in 45 days if you don't get your mortgage. And also, with rates where they were, people were pretty confident they would be able to get their mortgage. So they were willing to waive the mortgage contingency, which is always something you should talk about with your loan officer as well as your attorney before you do that. But I think it's not an unreasonable position to take to waive your mortgage contingency. But I do think that now that we're in a more balanced market, I don't think sellers are going to be able to drive as hard a bargain as they were. And so you're going to see the mortgage contingency come back, and you're going to see the inspection waiver go away. We didn't get a lot of them, but there were more than there should have been. And they always made me uncomfortable, and they make all of us in the industry uncomfortable when a buyer waives the inspection, because it just, and I don't like when sellers, require it, or, even if the buyer offers it, the seller should always say, I'd rather avoid the litigation that might happen if you find something 6 months from now that you think I concealed. So get an inspection done. Inspections are good. You should always get an inspection. So the fact that what few inspection waivers we had in our market, that they're going away, is a good thing. I want them gone. I don't think they're good. Never do it. If you're a buyer, you're a seller, if you're a buyer, seller, or you're a buyer, never waive your inspection. If you're an agent, never allow your client to waive the inspection. Number 11. The other thing that's going to change in this market is that migration from New York City will slow from where it was the last 2 years. It will be below, I think, the level it was at in 2017, 2018, slightly, I think, simply because my theory is that we, in 2020 and 21, we stole a lot of migratory buyers from 22, 23, 24, and 25, because all the people that were thinking of moving to the suburbs said, well, let's just move now. Like, we're going to move next year. Let's just move now. And you can see in this graph, which is a really helpful graph put out by the New York City Comptroller, who looked at it from the Manhattan or the New York City perspective. You can see, just to look at it for a second, look at the lines. A lot of those lines are very consistent. The blue and the orange are 2018, 2019, pre-COVID. And you can see that the net residential moves to and from New York City were like 5,000 monthly net residential moves. People, in other words, New York City is losing population because it's so expensive generally, and it's expensive, housing is expensive, taxes are high. So there's been a general kind of migratory out of New York City, but it was small, 5,000 a month or so, is where it was kind of at its during the normal markets of 18 and 19. And then you can see 20, which is the gray line, where it was normal until March. And then you saw like a massive migratory explosion for the rest of that year. We, continued all the way. When the restrictions eased, it went up a little bit. It wasn't quite as bad. It ended the year at about 22,000, maybe 22,000 monthly net residential moves out of New York City, minus 22,000. All right. And then if you pick up, the gray line ends in December of 2020, and then it picks up with the yellow line in 2021. And you can see that was at 20, and that got a little better, and that got a little better. And now we're back to the pattern that we had in 18 and 19 for moves out of the city. Now, I think it will probably stick with that pattern, because I do think that there's going to be a little bit of like residual people don't think the suburbs are so bad. I live in the suburbs. Suburbs are fine. It's very nice. I got a big lawn. I got a house. I got room. I've got all sorts of room I'm in an office. I'm in a home office right now as I do this. Suburbs aren't so bad. Those of you watching from New York City, I love you all. I love living in the city. I lived there for 16 years. It was great. But then I had kids and I needed to move to the suburbs. Just like, it's so funny. People are always like, they always mistake generational effects for cohort effects. Like millennials, they were like 10 years ago, they're like, the millennials are never going to move to the suburbs. And I'm like, yeah, it's because the millennials are like 28 right now, 29, and people don't move to the suburbs until they have kids. And then, the idea is cohort effects is that things people do in their late 20s, they live in cities. Generational effects was the idea that the millennials would somehow be different from everybody else, when they weren't. They all moved to the suburbs once they have kids. Not everybody, but like the trend was, and that's what's going to happen. We're going to see people move to the suburbs. I just wonder whether or not it's already slowed. It's already back to normal. So we're not at the I have to leave the city levels anymore. But I do think that we're going to see it like be a little lower than it was in 18 and 19, because I do think that we stole some buyers from next year. They bought in 2021 rather than wait to 2023. And you can see where they went. I mean, this is a really good graph, came from the same source. A nice chart that shows you that in the green, that's where there was positive residential moves, and it's all basically all the suburbs got it. And even the way outer suburbs, which actually did quite well, the suburbs outside Rockland, not the border suburbs of Westchester, Rockland, Orange is a little bit out there, but you saw some real growth in Columbia County and places north of that. People, once they realize they can work from home, they're like, let me go out as far as I can so I can buy a nice house for $300,000 or something like that. So you can see what happened. All right. And the New York City population. Oh, this was a report done by Pattern for Progress, which is a really brilliant think tank out in, they're based in Newburgh, and they study the Hudson Valley housing as well as other economic factors. They're focused on economic growth. And you can see where the counties that really benefited from migration out of New York City by county, and some of them had significant numbers of increases of people moving. Number 12, urban markets are going to fare a little better than suburban markets for the next year or two. And the reason is simple. They didn't have the run up. We didn't see in the Bronx, which I've highlighted, and Hudson County, which I've highlighted, we didn't see quite the dramatic increase in 20 and 21. And so 2022, they've been stronger. Look at Bronx from the prior year quarter was up 17%. It's up 27% from 2019. Hudson was one of the few counties that was up significantly from 2019. Their numbers are up. I think it's just the delayed the seller's market is just a little bit like 8 months, 9 months behind where it was in the suburbs, in those suburban but urban type markets. Number 13, same idea. We talked a little bit about the urban thing. I just think that the urban markets, they suffered a lot during 20 and 21 because they wanted more space. And now they're disproportionately benefiting from the fact that that's not in people's heads anymore. Number 13, something else that we're seeing, which is that condos and co-ops generally doing better than comparatively than single family homes. And again, that's just simply the comparison point is that in 20 and 21, co-ops and condos didn't do that well. And they didn't do that well for two reasons. One is living in a condo or a co-op means that you're living in a very tight space, right? And people didn't want tight spaces in 2021. The whole point of the migratory pattern we had coming out of the city, but also coming out of White Plains and moving to the suburbs of Westchester, coming out of Hudson County and moving to the suburbs of of northern New Jersey, or just being in Rockland County and living in a condo and saying, you know what, let's get a house. Let's get a starter house. Or let's get out of this condo because I want to have a backyard. I want to be able to get out and breathe fresh air. That's why condos and co-ops didn't do as well in 20 and 21. Even in the suburbs where we had people, they were leaving the city not to move into a condo. They wanted a single family home. So they didn't do as well. And then the other reason condos and co-ops didn't do as well is that the lower end of the market didn't do as well. And compared to the higher end of the market. And as I said, part of the artificiality, most of the price appreciation the last 2 years was legit. It was organic, but a little bit of it was artificiality and a change of the mix of people who were buying homes, that they were slightly wealthier because of the influx of people from the city. And the other reason they were slightly wealthier is that the pandemic economic hardships hit harder at lower income levels than at higher income levels. The people that lost their jobs were not, doctors, lawyers, accountants, people that could work from home, people that had salaried jobs. Those people didn't really lose their jobs as proportionally as the people who were hourly wage earners. People that worked in tourism, people that worked in restaurants, people that worked in anything involving travel or anything that involved retail. Those people are hourly rate workers. They make up the buyers for condos, co-ops, and starter homes in our markets. And those people were disproportionately impacted by COVID. Now, they've come back now. Like, in other words, with unemployment of 3.6%, they've all got jobs that they didn't have 2 years ago. Not all, but the ones who lost their job probably have gotten their jobs back. And their wages have gone up. Inflation's taking a bite out of that. Inflation's a real wild card here. But the basic idea is that, the lower end of the market is stronger now than it was 2 years ago, and the higher end is not quite as strong. So that's going to affect pricing a little bit. But it also means that condos and co-ops are ripping through it right now. Look how much higher they are than they were back in 2019. It's just crazy. All right, that's 13 points. The 14th point, which I think is really important, it's a longer term concern, all right? It's a longer term concern, is that we're going to see sort of stuck homeowners. And what I mean by stuck homeowners is I mean homeowners that homeowners who they bought a home or might have refinanced a home in, maybe they bought 3-4 years ago. Maybe they bought in 2017. All right. Or maybe they bought 10 years ago, but they refinanced 3-4 years ago to a sub 3% rate. The concern that we all should have, and I mean all of us, because I think that motility in the market, meaning movement in the market, is generally good for everybody. We want there to be, certainly if you're a real estate professional, you want there to be transactions. Transactions is how you make money. But if you're a homeowner, you don't want to see the market get slogged down. You don't want to see the market get locked up because nobody's moving. And the concern I have is that we might see a lot of people who just can't move or don't want to move because their payment is so low, because they refinanced to 3%. So even if they want to get a bigger house, it's like almost prohibitively expensive if rates don't get back down to the 3 to 4% level. If they stay up at 5 to 6%. Just to give you an idea, let's say someone bought a home last year in 2021 for $500,000. They put 20% down. They financed $400,000. They got a 3% loan, fixed rate mortgage. Their monthly payment is about $1,700. Okay. Now let's fast forward 10 years from now. Let's say that their home appreciates really well. So they have a nice big down payment. So they want to go buy a more expensive home, a bigger home. Well, the problem they're going to have is that even if they bought a higher priced home, obviously that's the 3, and the rates went down to 3%, their payment's going to go up. But look at what happens to their payment on a $600,000 loan, which is if they bought a $700,000 house. Look what the payments on that $600,000 loan look like at 4, 5, 6, and 7%. They're dramatically, if rates are 10 years from now or at 7%, and that person wants to buy a $700,000 home, they're going to be going from a $1,600 payment to a $4,000 payment. Now, inflation, all that. This is to some extent speculation, but my concern is that we really do need for people to have we can't have them locked and stuck in their home that they can't afford to leave because their monthly payment is so low that it's like golden handcuffs that they have tied to their house that they can't get away. So that's something that I think that we're going to take seriously in the next couple of years as an industry, the real estate industry, as well as the mortgage industry, that we need to help people find ways. If rates don't go down, we're going to have to figure out, can those loans become assumable, at which point they become an asset of the homeowner. We'll talk about that in a second. All right, let me give you 10 ways that we can adapt, both as consumers. So some of you are sellers, some of you are buyers, a lot of you are agents. So all these things kind of apply to some to more than others, but the general applicability. So we'll be 5 more minutes. One, you got to rediscover the value of marketing. If you're a seller or you're an agent who represents sellers, marketing, a lot of people got a little light in the marketing and in their marketing spend, the value of advertising, because the homes were selling so quickly that, I'm going to spend all this money on advertising a home. I already have 5 offers before we did the open house on Sunday. But so now, I would never have advised any agent in the market to not do amazing marketing for your clients. And I would never advise a seller not to bother doing the marketing, because I think marketing does affect pricing, even in a hot market like we had a year ago, 2 years ago, the super hot market. But certainly now, rediscover the value of marketing. Marketing is important. You should do a great job marketing the home. You should hire an agent who does a great job marketing the home. Number 2, same thing with the value of advertising. We should spend money. You should be willing to spend money as an agent advertising your listings. Sellers, you should be, asking for that, that you want to see some certain amount of online targeted advertising to try to find the right buyer. We shouldn't run away from that. Number 3, we have to rediscover the value of staging, which might have been something that people stopped doing. Still, even today, not enough homes in our market are at least detailed. I call it detailing, not staging. Staging is where it's a decorator eye. Staging is when like you mix colors and textures and eye levels and you tell a story about each room. And there are some homes that benefit from that now, and they will always benefit from that. And those are high-end homes, very unique homes, things like that, that really do need that decorator's eye. And there are wonderful stagers that really do add value. Every agent I know agrees with the idea that staging helps sell the home. Staging helps get you a better price for the home, and it's worth any investment you make in it. I think I really do believe that. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the average homeowner doesn't need a decorator to come in. They don't come in now. I don't think you need them to come in. But I think that what every homeowner could benefit from is detailing, like what you do with your car. You take your car, if you're going to sell your car and you're not going to sell it to the dealership, you're going to try to get someone to buy it, put a little sign in your window, drive it around town. You're going to polish it up. You're going to get the, all the papers that fell into the back seat and the coffee cups that you tossed behind you from Starbucks when you were done with your coffee. This is what I do to my car, by the way. So I don't know if you do it to your car, but the point is you're going to clean the car up. You're going to make it. That's what you should do with your house. You got to declutter it. You got to clean it. You got to depersonalize it. I know you love Velvet Elvis, but like not every buyer loves Velvet Elvis. So if you're selling a home, you got to take the Velvet Elvis. You got to take the 400-piece Yadro collection, go put it in storage. You're going to be moving. Then start your move now by getting half the stuff that you have in your house out of the house to make it look nice and roomy for the buyers that come in. That's something that I think it's a practice that we weren't doing enough of pre-hot market. We definitely didn't do enough of it in the hot market, but it's something you should do if you're an agent, you should do it for every one of your listings. If you're a seller, you should absolutely talk to agents about, well, what should I do to make this house look really presentable to a buyer? Number 4, we got to discover the value of open houses. Open houses are really good. It's a good way to get early stage buyers into homes. They don't like working with an agent yet because they're not really that serious, but they want to go sort of see what's going on in the market. We do it as a service to them. We do it as a service to get the seller more exposure. A lot of people, they didn't do quite as many of them during the hot markets. They felt they didn't need to. We need to do more of them. Number 5, this is something that we'll spend a little more time on. Most mortgages are not assumable, by which I mean, I have a home, my mortgage is $400,000 and I am paying 3% on $400,000. A couple of years from now, I've paid down my mortgage. I now only owe $370 on it. It's still at 3%. It's fixed. My payment's fixed at whatever that payment would be. And someone wants to buy the home, but the rates are at 5-6%. Wouldn't it be really great if they could pay me for, let's say the home is worth $450. They pay me $450, but then they also pay me a little bit more than $450 because what they're going to do is assume the loan and transfer the loan from me to them so that they can keep that monthly payment that they have. Now, this doesn't happen much, okay? And it certainly hasn't happened much in the past because there was no reason to assume a seller's loan when you could get a loan for sub 3%. But now that the sellers all have loans in the 3% range, and you can only get a loan in the 5-6% range, if your loan is assumable, it becomes an asset. Now, the way it works is that if someone were to try to buy my home, which I owe $370, they have to assume the $370,000 mortgage, but then they also have to pay me. So I have to get paid on top of the $370. I've got to get a down payment from them, and they have to qualify for the mortgage. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to work out with the banks, but I think we're going to find it's worth it if the buyer, if you're buying a home with an FHA loan or a VA loan. Those are the ones that are assumable in most cases. Conventional loans, which what most people have in our market, those are not assumable by their terms, but that's a choice by the banks. And I don't know whether there might be pressure on the banks to allow people to assume those mortgages. They're already on the books. There's already a setup for the payments. There's been a locked stream of payments on them. I don't know enough about that end of the secondary market to know what would happen if we, really pressured banks to allow those mortgages to be assumable. The mortgages have a clause in them, most of them, that require them to be paid if the home is sold, but that's the choice of the bank. That's just a contractual term. It's not a regulatory term or anything like that. So the idea is that I think, if I'm a seller, I would love to have a loan that my buyer could assume because that means more money for me. And if I'm a buyer, I would love to be able to assume a loan if I had enough money to put down to make up the difference rather than get a loan and pay the new rates if the rates stay up where they are. So that's something we should keep in mind. Number 6, we have to increase agent-client communication. Basically, the idea that as I said, the relationships are going to go on a lot longer than they've gone on before. And so there's going to be more of a need to make sure you maintain communication, because like a lot of times these listing periods were 2 weeks long. So there wasn't a need for great communication. We're going to need to increase that. I would also tell everybody, agents, sellers, buyers, listen to the market and what the market is telling you. Buyers, don't assume you're in a declining price environment, because I don't think you're going to be in a declining price environment. It could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to happen. Not anytime, really, not in the next year or two. Sellers, listen to what the market's telling you. You're not going to get 25% more than the neighbor got last year, so you shouldn't price it to that point. You should put, if you want to put on the market, you want to test the market, it's your house, you're the boss. But if the feedback you're getting, meaning that you're not getting offers, and the feedback, like the anecdotal feedback you're getting from buyers and buyer agents, is that it's priced a little too high, you got to listen to the market. I mean, I sold a condo in Nyack when I moved out to the suburbs. I bought it and then I sold it 5 years later. And that's, I mean, I had overpriced. I'll admit that I was overpriced when I first put it on the market. And then, after a period of time, I adjusted. My agents were very smart. They were helping me. And they showed me that people had seen my place and then bought something else because it was cheaper. And the other place was comparable to my place. So it taught me, I really had to adjust to what the market was telling me. So you got to adjust to the market. You can see what's going on. Are people adjusting their prices? Are they dropping their prices? We're going to see price reductions. I mean, we're going to see more price reductions than we've seen anytime in the last 2 or 3 years, but that's just a function of people pricing to growth from last year. And they're not going to see a lot of growth from last year. It's not a function that sale prices aren't going down. The fact that people are dropping their asking prices doesn't mean that the sold price is going to be lower than it was last year. Number 8, really important for you buyers, start your mortgage process early. All right. The fact that the market is a little more balanced doesn't mean you can get sloppy, start looking at houses without getting pre-qualified, that you can not follow basic financial hygiene as your home is on the market, like saving all your documents, stubs, pay bank statements, tax statements. And don't change your financial profile. Don't change jobs. Don't borrow a lot of money out of nowhere. Don't move too much money around in your bank accounts. Banks hate seeing that. They think there's something going on. Don't generate a new credit problem. If someone wants $75 for something you bought and you think that they're cheating you, don't let it go to collections. Don't let $75 be a thing that now all of a sudden you get a blemish on your credit. Like, pay attention to what your financial profile looks like and start the process early. You should meet with the mortgage lender the minute you start looking for a home. And I certainly would advise you to meet with Hudson United, who's sponsoring today's session. I'm one of the, I have an ownership interest in Hudson United, so full disclosure there. But we run the company. We've run it for 15 years. And we try to have the same quality experience that we give people in a real estate company that we give them in the mortgage and title and insurance companies that we also have within the organization. But they do a good job. We have great loan officers, and they're willing to start working with you from the minute you start looking at a house. They'll give you pre-qualification. They'll advise you. Anytime you have a question, you give them a call. Number 9, don't forget about the mortgage interest deduction. We talk about how, oh my God, rates are higher, what that's doing to the monthly payment. Isn't it a terrible thing? The monthly payment's going up. Just remember that there is this wonderful thing called the mortgage interest deduction, which is if you're itemizing your taxes, which if you're at a certain income level, you're probably doing, that most of your monthly payment in the first 5 years of your mortgage is interest. That's just the way the banks structure it, which means that, and that's not bad for you necessarily, because what it means is that for the first 5 years you have that loan, virtually that entire payment is deductible. So it can save you money on your taxes. Basically, if you finish the year with the last $100,000 that you make and you're finishing that at 35% or 38% or whatever the heck it is, and you're basically getting, for if you pay $40,000 in let's say $30,000 a year in mortgage payments, then you're getting $10,000 back, because that $30,000 deductible, 1/3 of that $30,000 is deductible, which means they don't have to pay taxes on it, which means you save on the tax. So it's a helpful thing. And the reason I want to highlight it is that people have been asking questions saying, well, aren't I capped at $10,000? No, the $10,000 SALT cap applies to state and local taxes, which is your property tax, which is your state income tax. The $10,000 cap does not apply to the mortgage interest deduction. The mortgage interest deduction applies to the first $750,000 on new purchases. And if you bought it before 2017, it's up to $1 million. And that's 750,000 if you have one home and you have $750,000 debt on it, you get the deduction on the entire 750. If you also have a vacation home and you have $750,000 of debt on that, you don't get anything for that because you only get the deduction on it's a max 750 for a couple or a person filing singly. Okay, but don't forget that does take the sting out of the higher rates a little bit. And then 10, here's a commercial. We have a great program at Howard Hanna Rand Realty called the Money Back Guarantee. Sellers can put the guarantee on their home, doesn't cost them anything. Buyers can get a guarantee that Howard Hanna Rand Realty will buy the home back for 100% of the purchase price under certain conditions. Gives you a certain amount of, in a market that's kind of moving, it gives you a certain amount of comfort and reassurance that you're making the right decision buying that home. So, if you're working with a Rand agent, make sure you talk to them about that. And if you want to get the full market report, go to rand.me/NYQMR or NJQMR. All right. Well, I want to thank you all. We just a little bit more than an hour. We're trying to peg it for an hour. I hope you enjoyed the hour. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions for me, if I can elaborate on something, or you think I'm full of crap and you want to argue with me, fine. Shoot me an email, joseph.rand@randrealty.com, joseph.rand@randrealty.com. I'll be happy to engage with you. If you we'll try to get the slides somewhere. People want to see the slides. If you want to see a slide, talk to your Rand agent. They've been shared with the Rand agents. So talk to, or if you're an agent yourself at another company, just email me and I'll send you the slides. How about that? Just email me if you want them. You don't want to have to ask somebody else at the company. You can ask me, and you can use a fake name. I don't care. Well, I'm just going to send you the slides. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed it. Just it's okay. The market is slowing, but it's not slow. The market is cooling, but it's not cold. And it's definitely not 2009 again. Market's going to be fine. We're all going to be fine. Everybody have a great weekend.